Hi, I think I probably saw a lot of you before in the user provisioning system discussion, but I'm Sam Bailey, sysadmin, and I care dearly about how your systems perform. Yep, my pretty face, which is always lovely. So we're actually going to do it in reverse today, so I'm going to have a bit of a chat about the security side of things, some of the advantages and options with single sign-on, and then looking a bit more detail at the performance of your Schoolbox servers. And so this is what I'm kind of hoping that you'll be able to take something home that you can use. Particularly around, Schoolbox has a lot of private information, and how your users access Schoolbox, they expect privacy when accessing it as well. So we need to make sure that everything is kept secure and how that can be done, how you can improve both security and user experience using single sign-on, and particularly how to get the most out of your server and make sure you don't have performance issues at peak load times. So, fair warning, I like cats, so I've added a few little pictures in every now and again. So we're talking about security first. So this is the key requirement, it being that if I'm a parent, a student, a teacher that's coming into your system, I'm expecting that it's a school system, that it's going to be secure, private, other people won't be able to see my stuff. There are both internal and external threats, particularly when they're accessing it from home. You've got a whole range of things you can't control when they're coming through to your network. But also internal ones with some of the interesting kids that seem to find some nice tools to try and attack your own systems. Now, what we've been doing is seeing that lots of schools have been doing security audits across their whole systems, including Schoolbox. If you do have results against Schoolbox in your reports, please send them to us, particularly if there's anything bad. We do get stuff coming through from different schools and have fixed up systems for everyone, so being able to share helps every system. We did, however, also decide to run James, from his black hat days, decided to run a penetration test against version 17 of Schoolbox. Yep. He did that about a month ago, and despite all of his capabilities, which are far in excess of my white hat side of things, wasn't able to find any particular security vulnerabilities. That said, there are lots of suites out there, and if you pay a lot of money, they'll throw a lot of tests at your system. I am going to suggest this because it did happen to one of our schools once. If you do want to run a test against Schoolbox and you want to run a test with the auditors using actual accounts, so not just a pure external test of Schoolbox, but being able to log in as a staff, parent and student and then trying to break Schoolbox, you can do it. Please use your dev server. If you can't do that and you must use your live server, schedule downtime for your users. Call us, we'll take a full backup and make sure everything is in the right state, and then let them run it, and then we can revert to the backup afterwards. Please don't let a security auditor use actual accounts on a live system and then not tell us and not revert to a backup, because that can cause some, although it may not break and cause any security issues, it may put a whole heap of irrelevant data throughout your system and put things in places you don't expect, or change text box content. The other big thing with security, as you may have noticed particularly with Chrome and Firefox recently, is they've been upping their security warnings if you don't use HTTPS. The benefit is we now have access to Let's Encrypt, and I've probably got about 75% of your servers are now using Let's Encrypt for certificates, so they're there, available, we manage them for you. It's kind of set and forget. The options that we've given you so far are mostly around two different profiles, which we name HTTPS sometimes and HTTPS everywhere. Now, everywhere is, as it sounds, every page is always on HTTPS, which then expects that all the content that your users put in also needs to match that. If it's not uploaded into Schoolbox, the third-party system needs to also be on HTTPS. Our default for a long time has been HTTPS sometimes. So usually login page, admin system, anywhere there's a password that can be put in gets secured. Everything else gets forced down to allow teachers to embed things from sites that aren't on HTTPS. Now, In 2018, James made a decision the other day. In 2018, we're going to start to deprecate the support of anything over HTTP. So it'll be purely going to HTTPS. Now, it's not going to be January 1 that we all just turn it off or anything. We're going to put some features into the code to help the migration, particularly where people have already embedded things with HTTP, to help those upgrade automatically. And it'll most likely be that new schools that come on at the start of the year will start that way, and then over 2018 we'll be deprecating it. That said, in October this year, Chrome will start to mark all of the HTTP pages as big not secure in your top left-hand corner in your URL bar. So please be prepared for your parents to call and ask why their page now says not secure, because that might be a different factor for you to be working through. It's an easy switch for our support team. When you are ready for it, just ask. It takes 30 seconds. We can flip it over. The main thing is about content that's still embedded in the old way, and encouraging teachers to make sure that they choose content that's relevant and secured. The next part was, please start to look at using single sign-on. No system is perfect, but every time Schoolbox doesn't have to see a password makes the process a little bit more secure, because then it's only with the one system that you can control. That's possibly my favorite from a sysadmin point of view. I've not seen the passwords anymore, but I recognize that's not the case for everything. So this leads into our SSO stuff and more cats. So my highest recommendation at the moment is to find a way to use single sign-on. In Schoolbox, that mostly means using SAML, and most schools would be using, probably found to use ADFS, since it's free to you, other than the time to learn to run and maintain it. Good luck. I'm glad I don't have to run more of those sorts of systems as well. There are other companies out there that will partner with you to run that for you, like a StudentNet or other systems as well that are out there. If you don't want to spend the time, you can spend the money instead, and they'll do that stuff for you. Anything that allows the user to more quickly get access to their information without having to type in passwords over and over again is obviously going to make it easier for you. I do like the idea of one place to manage all of the accounts, though. Schoolbox, you use a user provisioning system to get them in, but if all the authentication's in one place, then that's the one place you can organise from a secure aspect to lock down as much as you need to. You do also have the option of enabling, in many SAML single sign-on systems, to use multi-factor authentication. Now, in many places that's not going to be a problem, but if you use different accounts for your obviously your domain admins, but also for, say, if you've got separate accounts for super users that aren't using their normal network logins, or are but in a different way, have a different user account, you could enable multi-factor authentication for using that way for your super users. It also led to an idea that I had that maybe there are certain super user actions that probably should request you to confirm that you are the right person, and yes, you are actually going to do the right thing. Because at the moment, super user is quite a broad category, and it's perhaps a little overused in certain places. So just a quick little update, we've changed some things. The one that I've mostly been doing for you, particularly if you use ADFS. For ADFS and all the other systems, in the past we had to export a token signing certificate to be able to link up and accept that what we got from the identity provider was acceptable and we could log you in. Those certificates normally have an expiry of them of 1 to 2 years, and in the case of ADFS, it automatically rolls it over for you and starts using it 19 days before the expiry, which can cause a little problem when your teachers go to log in and realise that it's not letting them in anymore. What we do have now, at the bottom of the security page in the admin system, you can put a URL in to link to the identity provider, which then reads the current active list of tokens. So you don't have to think about it anymore. Now, I have been tracking it, and I've been trying to grab them before they expire for each school, and where possible, just go in and fill it in for you. We did release it about 4 or 5 months ago. But if you're not sure if that's there, go have a look and check, and then stop that from being a maintenance load later on, just so you can set and forget. The other thing that we've been doing is working with both Google and Microsoft on using single sign-on through their platforms. We've got a few schools using it through Azure AD. There is a limitation with Azure AD, is that you do need to have the Azure AD Premium, which, depending on what kind of school you are, can cost an absolute bucket load. So apologies, but if you've already got that, you can actually set up all your single sign-on to go straight through Azure, including for parents, where you can do mapping of a different kind of username to make it a bit easier for them to come through to Schoolbox. The other one we've been working on is with Google, which I didn't realise originally actually even had SAML support, but it does. We use it internally. We've got a Schoolbox instance for our intranet, and we use Google Suite with us, so all of us go straight in. We actually have one of our schools in Tasmania, that's Jeremy Alomes at St Patrick's, who's working on getting parents logging in via Google as well. We're using their external ID, in this case it's Synergetic, at their organisation to log into Google and then come SAML through that. There's a couple of little tweaks that made that difficult, but Jeremy's got them all pretty much sorted now, which is pretty amazing. The good news being, of course, that you're not having to pay a lot more for that, and Google's already got the platform for you. So it was an interesting idea. There's a few little technical hitches, but they're almost all sorted now as well. So it's something that can be looked at. Before I move on to performance, did anyone have any questions about security or single sign-on in particular?
How are you managing the security of something like the app signing in to Schoolbox if you're using SSO?
That's a great question. So there's actually a change currently underway between, if you're using the Digistorm app, the Digistorm app currently has a separate API that it talks to Schoolbox, and it sends credentials directly through there to sign in. So at the moment it doesn't use the full SAML setup. However, that's currently being worked on by both us and Digistorm. We're changing our API to support so when you go to log into the app, that it would push you over to SAML. Now it's not required in all cases, but if you did want it that way, it would then be an option for you. So they go through SAML and then come back to the app, just as you would normally do with many of your Google apps and that sort of stuff, where it pushes you off to a Google authentication page and comes back.
Along that line of thinking, if you went down that path, you could then turn off the ability to log into Schoolbox
Directly?
without SAML.
Yep.
Because with SAML turned on, you can still do that. I think
So you can still bypass, yes, you can log into Schoolbox and bypass SAML, which is mostly what we do because our password's in Schoolbox and not in your Active Directory or other LDAP system. But yes, it is entirely viable that if you want to use the app, you could remove all of the LDAP configuration and just have whatever passwords were stored in Schoolbox, which mostly should be empty, except for the Alaris account. And then, yes, only log in through SAML. I'd probably still recommend at least one other account being there just to fix when there is SAML problems. But that could be a standalone account that doesn't have an external ID attached to it at all. So that's possible. There's already some schools I know that do operate that way. They just don't have the app yet, so that hadn't come up yet for them.
What would be really nice to see with, single sign-on, SAML, that's all great and it works really well and it's very solid, but what would be really nice is that we have to assume to a certain extent that teachers' passwords are sometimes going to be exposed, and those high-level SAC assets or things that we want in certain libraries to protect, when they're uploaded, if we had a button which said just require two-factor to open this document or access this document, that way AD is populating with all the information, or a table is in some way, shape or form. So is there a way you can actually do it within the box when some kid gets someone else's credits and basically starts poking around to say, no, you're not going any further until you type in code in or your authenticated code in or whatever?
Yeah, it's not something we've done so far, but that's what I was suggesting before, that there are certain tasks that should either be re-prompted for password or have the option of multi-factor. I'm interested in that. Thing is, I hadn't really had requests, so I'd like to see what kinds of things you'd like to see to use that kind of system. Any suggestions would be welcome through our forum, and yeah, I'm all for that kind of stuff.
No, does anyone
yes, the support team's with you with that one. Our biggest request that we get is undeleting stuff that wasn't meant to be deleted. We now have a tool on the command line to assist us with that, which makes us helpful, which also means that we're looking at then bringing that into the UI, and that's being discussed both at as a super user action to be able to go see a list of stuff that's been deleted through the system and undelete recursively through all that sort of stuff. The other factor is the regret feature, I suppose, would be that much like Google has the feature, you send an email and you've got a few seconds I'd like to undo that action. The same kind of thing should be available to a teacher who's just deleted their own thing, to be able to just go, hey, this is something that I've just done in the last few minutes, I should be able to undo that particular delete, to give that ability. There's also some discussions about trying to be a bit, as much as we try, to be a little bit even more clear about exactly what you have selected to delete and everything it is going to remove. Because as much as when you're doing a cleanup you can accidentally get in the wrong place, and as much as super users can do recursive deletes, they still happen too often. So I'd like to reduce the chance of it happening in the first place, but then also making it easier for either a teacher or super user to undo that change as quickly as possible, instead of having to wait for us to come and clean that up. But yeah, two-factor on certain kinds of things, or at least reprompt for password or something like that, which I have to think about in a SAML context as well. I'd be welcome to specific instances where you'd like that kind of feature. I'd be very interested in that.
And what would SAML do this week in front of the user? Do they sign in the browser?
So for staff and students, normally you'd already have something open in with G Suite already. And if that's the case, you go to your Schoolbox and it goes straight in. Where you're not already signed in to Google, you'd get your lovely Google page where it has your list of accounts, and you choose the account and it would go through. The technical difficulty that we hit when we're working with Jeremy at St. Patrick's was, as much as that works for staff and students, they're likely to already have that in their sign-in list. If you're giving parents a sign-in specific for the school that's a Google account and they already have Google accounts, when you try and do that process, by default, it's going to pop up with their own accounts, and it's not going to allow them to add their new one in as easily, and it'll try and go straight through and go, no, sorry, you can't log in with your personal Google account because that's not what's linked. It's looking for the organisation one. But we believe we've worked around a fix for that, so that they would go through and be able to click yes, add the school account to their list, and it would just pop in your list of Google accounts, I want that one today. The other part was making sure when you signed out of Schoolbox, it could then also selectively sign out of just that Google account and not all of them, was the other half of it. So we've almost got that completed now.
Do you have an easy output of all these?
Well, it's mostly the work the school's been doing, as in the tweaks and stuff that they've been doing outside of Schoolbox itself, so it's not to our code. But it's almost there, and Jeremy's willing to share as much as he can with anyone else who's interested in that idea. So as soon as that's out there, much like Justin Warner put his scripts for how to create a page to change passwords in AD from a web page, that's on the help forums. Yeah, I'm happy to share that sort of stuff. Unfortunately, I can't create all of that and put it all out, but if you're willing to help each other, I'm all for it. Right, now we can move on to my favourite topic then in performance. So, is your server performing? And in some cases the answer is no. So, performance is really critical. Sometimes that seems like an obvious thing, particularly around your peak periods. So, I've got lovely big graphs of all your servers and when you have peak loads, and most of the specs that we've put up for Schoolbox servers are designed around less about the absolute maximum peak load and more about the usual load, the average, well not even average, the just above average load is kind of the design we'd gone for. But this is the thing I find every year, it's the same. So your absolute peak load will happen in the first 2 weeks of term. The next absolute peak load will be the 2 weeks after that. And then after that, it's the month after that one. And in terms of a daily basis, it's, except for one school, it's pretty much 8:30 local time to about 9:15. That is when your absolute peak load. That's your regular peak loads though. The irregular peak loads is when you have the instance of, hi, I'd like to have all of our students log in, go to this page and click on a link to fill out a survey or something like that. And the entire school tries to log in at once to do that. In either cases, we can plan for these, and we can also make changes to do it. So I wanted to highlight some of the things that we've been doing to help you, and also some options that you've got available to you to help performance, even if it's only a change that you made for a short period, for an expected peak, that you could then undo when it's not as busy. So the first thing is the stuff we did, and I kind of love Schoolbox version 17, which is now gold, because it flies. So the first thing that we did was switch to a new version of PHP, which is the core language we write Schoolbox in. Now, my stats say I get 5 to 50% page load time improvement. James has seen for certain pages that are quite heavy, we've had 100% performance improvement over the existing stuff. Now, once you've got 17 and it's working, your teachers will be happy that it's initially fast, and then they won't notice anymore because they'll just expect it. So it'll just kind of work from that. So it'll be nice, it's faster, it works. But it's really important for your server because it's taking less time to do the work, which means there's now resources freed up to handle more load in a shorter period of time. So those peak loads can now be handled with a lot smaller resourced Schoolbox server. The other one we did a huge change was is we rewrote probably 3/4 of the back end of our notification system. Now, as much as that has a couple of nice things about notifications, that it fixes some design issues that affect all of you, the biggest effect that it has initially for your server performance is the drop in RAM requirements. So previously we had a RAM requirement of a certain amount of RAM needed to be available for every user in your system, regardless of whether they were logged in or active. We just had to account for it, and it was this RAM to user ratio, which meant you couldn't add alumni users in very easily that were low activity users that you have thousands of potentially. In this new system, one of the examples we had is I took a server that had normally a 3,000 student server with associated parents and staff that would use, for one of this particular backend system, anywhere from 3 to 16 gig of RAM when it's doing its normal stuff, and a lot more if it decided to explode that day. In the new system, so instead of 3 to 16 gig, it's now using 162 meg of RAM. And it's no longer related to how many users are in the system, so we just freed up a whole heap of RAM on your box to use for normal web requests, which means more performance and a lot more capacity at peak load times. Also, the notification system becomes a little bit more reliable in when it and how it does its work. I believe there's a discussion on the notification system anyway, which I imagine quite a few of you will be going to. If not, there is one other thing it does fix. You may have found sometimes when you've had a notification that goes out, say it's a due work item, and the due work item opens and students get a notification, say it's ready to go, and there's a future close date that hasn't occurred yet. And what you may have seen sometimes is, weirdly at 4 AM, that users seem to get a re-notification of certain things. And it usually this happened when parts of an event had already occurred, but there was still future events still attached to it, and it got reprocessed. The new notification system doesn't have that flaw at all. So that was particularly important if you had certain kinds of notifications, say it's particularly around calendar events, and if you have the app and push notifications, no one wants a push notification at 4 AM. So that fixes all of that problem, which was a design issue from our 3 years ago when we originally designed the system for how it handled a particular error scenario. One of the other things that we've done recently, which was in 16.5, which you've got, was we made a change so that Or is this only in 17? Ooh, no, this is in 17. So if you've disabled profile images for students, or if you've disabled staff images from being displayed to students or parents, which are admin options that you've got available to you, it was adding extra load. So it would, particularly if you use something like the class list component. If you've got the class list component and you're not using photos for students, you had a list of students and a whole list of pretend profile pictures for them. And unfortunately what that was doing, it was making a request to the server for all of those pictures for no real benefit for you. So what we've made a change now is that that's now going to not even try and display those pictures. If the class list and you've got that user can't see the picture, that list of pictures, don't try and even display them. That actually frees up when you do have particularly morning sign-ins or other unexpected peak loads where people go, a whole heap of people go to the same class page with that kind of thing on it. It reduced a lot of the load for the server that you weren't getting benefit from a user perspective of anyway. We've also made a whole heap of improvements to our database connections and how we do the caching for that. Some of those are in 16.5 and some of them are in 17. In theory, you should just get 17 and be much more performant and get much more peak load out of it and not have to put 64 gig of RAM on a server. Thank you, Matthew. The other one that we did change is to assist us to make it a more performant system. We've dropped support for certain kinds of browsers, particularly IE 9 and 10. Now, they may still work in some cases. We've just not designed to definitely support them anymore. IE 9 probably won't work well, but IE 10 probably will, just not guaranteed to do so. But it allows us to write things in a way that's a little bit more performant for how pages load in the browser, as well as the server requests that you get. And the other one is that HTTPS everywhere actually improves your server performance. The reason being that there are certain levels of requests that effectively have to be doubled because they move from one part of the system to another, and if you're using that HTTPS sometimes profile, they'll go to a page that was originally HTTPS, they go to the next page, and it has to get redirected back down, which is effectively duplicating the requests. As much as we optimize that from the back end, it's not optimal for your server performance. So the other part of it is the browsers do, particularly Firefox and Chrome, and actually Edge as well. Safari not quite as much, but when a page is entirely in HTTPS, it can also do some different performance tweaks on how it loads the page for the user, so it actually all display a bit quicker. That's particularly noticeable on Schoolbox Help. Certain pages will seem to load faster than you would expect them to do when you see the same kind of page on your own system. And some of those tweaks are already in Schoolbox Help for that reason. I did speak about alumni. So what can you do? Should I resource my system a bit differently? For term one, for those first few weeks, if you have run into performance issues before, 17 is going to help anyway. But that said, if you want to plan for a time where you decide to temporarily increase the Schoolbox resources for, say, the first 4 weeks of term, we can assist, our support team can help you go through that process and make sure that's all seamless and doesn't cause any problems. The notification rebuild in 17 also means that your servers will restart faster as well. So if we have to do a temporary change, you've got very little downtime to change those resources. But I would suggest trying to think about planning for peak load events, whether it's just start of year stuff, which is what I have fun with watching all the school servers at the start of year, but also for those unplanned events, or planned peak load events, whether it's you suddenly have 500 parents having to log in within 5 minutes of each other in a new parent session, just making sure the pages that they go through are quite performant. Before I go into those, the other thing I was going to suggest is in your system you have, which I may cover in my slides later, How many of you like to use the gallery components or the slideshow components? Yeah. So one of the things you may have noticed is that if you've got a slideshow component, particularly on your dashboards, if it's got 20 images in it, it's not loading, it's trying to load all of them, even if they're only there for a few seconds before they go somewhere else. So I'd highly recommend for your dashboards, if you're using the slideshow or gallery, to only keep it to a few images. If it's on a home page and you want to have more, as long as it's a lower traffic page and not something you're going to throw, hey, can 100 users please go and view the gallery of 200 sports images from just yesterday, and do it within 5 minutes of each other. Those would be fine to be larger items, but try to be careful with that, because it's one that we do find trips us up. There have been many cases where we've seen, the server just doesn't seem fast today, it's being slow, and someone has made a change to add some extra images just into one place and not realise the rest of the performance impact that's going to occur. Now again, 17 makes things better, but there are things that we can control to help. So high traffic pages, not too many images is the short.
They're really good photos, maybe just an extra couple.
Well, you could make it one big image and just tile them all together, because then it's only one request to the server.
Is there a report we can run that will tell us how many images are linked to particular pages if we wanted to be preventative without these issues?
Against the database, somewhat yes, but only for certain scenarios, particularly for dashboards, not as easily. For home pages, yes, if they're being used for images that are directly in the folder that are being displayed, as opposed to pulling through from an alternate source. Yes, we could highlight areas that are using a lot of images, which may be perfectly valid as low traffic pages, but yes, that would be something that you could either do against the database or ask our support team to help you with, to do a check over to see what was going on. Next one. So the other thing is that Schoolbox relies, with the exception of cloud, on your infrastructure. So if you want it to be quick and fast, please make sure your DNS servers that Schoolbox is using are working. So when you decommission an AD server and you've updated your system settings in Schoolbox, please tell us, because you may have forgotten that Schoolbox is still using it as a DNS server. We are tracking that now. So in our new monitoring system, which I might show you a couple of pictures of a bit later, we do track both the performance of your DNS servers as well as whether they're responding at all. And so you may get a ticket from our support team saying, hey, we noticed one of your DNS servers isn't working. That may slow your logins to Schoolbox by 30 seconds. Can you help us out here? Or we've disabled it temporarily, can you give us a new one? So we're tracking that now, but that's one of the big key ones. Obviously, your authentication system is performing appropriately, as is your external DB. External DB even more so for things that would occur on login. So when a user logs in, we get their list of classes. So if you find your particular part of the system that might be slow for some reason, or if you see really slow dashboard logins, even at non-peak periods, ask us to help and work out where it's going wrong, but also a double check if that kind of part of your system was running a little slow. If you don't have to use a reverse proxy in front of Schoolbox, don't. I have no end of fun debugging where things go wrong there, because it puts an extra barrier in between users and Schoolbox. And most of the time Schoolbox is trying to, it may run on different ports like our WebSockets for notifications, or data's being transmitted through and the reverse proxy may alter the data before it gets to the Schoolbox server, and can cause upload issues and a variety of other things. It does still work, Schoolbox does still work around behind a reverse proxy, but if you've got the option, I'd recommend not doing so. And the last one is, yeah, make sure WebSocket connections are working. We have, although it's less of an issue these days, if you find that you've got users on whether it's a particular VLAN or using particular AV products, and their notification list on the right-hand side hasn't been loading, but everyone else seems okay. Not only are they not getting the notifications, it's also going to cause performance issues loading the rest of Schoolbox as well. So it's really important that gets through. That also applies to parents who are coming through from external systems, which is harder to control because they're not yours, but making sure that at least from the bits you can control from your firewall, that is working. Your notifications list does work externally. If you test that for yourself and it works, then that's as best as you can probably get for that. But it does improve the performance of the page loading. So I've mentioned using HTTPS everywhere, and what most of you will be aware is when we connect to an external system, external database, whether it's TAS, Synergetic, School Edge, PC School, we do have a cache in front of our queries. So it's normally set to 5 minutes. It significantly enhances the performance of Schoolbox. It significantly enhances the performance of your system as well. There's no good reason to completely load up your database when you're using it for your other purposes as well. We noticed that there was a whole heap of schools that had this set to 0. So we've been sending out tickets to everyone to say, hey, we've jumped back up again, just so you know. If you need to change it, you can change it again, but we'd highly recommend making sure that that's not set to 0. This was a fun one we've had a few times. So if you import your calendars into Schoolbox with a live subscription, so say it's coming from Google Calendar or Exchange or that kind of stuff, and you're subscribing Schoolbox to those calendars, if you can change the export time frame to be reduced, so say only going 2 months into the future for subscribed calendars that have a lot of information in them, will significantly improve the performance of the calendar system and when your users are trying to access that. Now, you may have noticed some performance issues we had recently with the calendar system, with timetables, which have now been fixed up, and as well as a couple other things. But that's certainly something that you can control, and usually has very little difference to your end users. Now, you may still have a calendar that has a little bit of information in it, and it does go 12 months. That's fine. It's all about the total quantity of data that's being processed at once. The other one being that for the few areas that are still left that can't account for it, turning on the visibility of staff and student profiles actually affects performance quite a bit, because it's not having to do double redirects. Now, that's usually a school policy process for who you display that sort of stuff to. That comes down to which components do I use. Most of this we covered earlier. The weird one that I did hit doesn't affect Schoolbox so much in terms of its page load time, but it does for your users. I had a page that a teacher had uploaded onto it 100 embedded YouTube videos. It kind of slows their computers down a little bit, and what isn't great for your bandwidth either. It doesn't happen often, and it's kind of a gimme, but yeah, it does happen occasionally. So one of the things I wanted to highlight is, as I mentioned, we do monitor your systems. Now, there's a few different systems out there. We have about 3 systems that monitor and feedback from your servers, and there's also at least one already available to you to do some basic monitoring of the Schoolbox server. And one of the problems we have is Schoolbox is a single server, and it runs a lot of processes, including video processing. So if you're using the monitoring directly out of your hypervisor, your Hyper-V or VMware, you'll get false flags, particularly on CPU usage, because they say Schoolbox has been using 100% for an hour. That's a problem if Schoolbox is then operating slowly for your users, because usually it means it's doing work in the background. But if pages are loading fine, it's not really an issue. We prioritize different kinds of tasks, so it can give these false flags about what's actually going on, because what's important is the performance to the end user. So we do have SNMP enabled. So if you haven't already, you can connect up to your Schoolbox server. Just send us a message and we'll send you what the community string is, or we can change the community string for SNMP if you want, and you can read the basic performance off that one. But we also monitor, a lot of different ways. for a long time we've used New Relic to a limited extent to monitor the servers as well as the page performance. But we've been moving somewhat away from that. Well, I've been moving us somewhat away from that, it's more accurate. And we have other reporting back from our configuration management, which says, are your servers in this exact configuration every 30 minutes? And reports some other data about the way that the Schoolbox is configured and that sort of stuff. Well, the last one is this monitor system, this somewhat large monolith I've been building recently, which uses that kind of stack. So if you're interested in building some pretty stuff for your own things, you can check out some of this stuff, and I love talking about it, so feel free to ask questions. It gives us a lot of information. This is an example of one of our dashboards that we use internally to keep a bit of a track of what's going on across the fleet. And this includes DNS servers that are not responding or not reporting properly. Got another one that gets LDAP performance. The dreaded disk space issue, which continually comes up, as well as memory and a range of other things. So we've got an overview of what's going on, and we're continuing to improve what we get so we can try and pick up the issues before you have to report them to us, and can either handle them or at least alert you to them that something's going on. The other thing we do have is we do have dashboards per server. And this highlights a whole range of information, not just about CPU and RAM usage, but also page performance, connections, the number of connections per minute for the databases, and a range of other things for tuning. It gives us a really good idea, particularly when something's gone wrong. They said, why is this not working properly? We can use this to very quickly start to diagnose what's wrong, where has it occurred in a rather complex Schoolbox stack. Now, the fun part for some of this, aside from the pretty graphs, which are always nice, is that we're going to be giving you access to our monitoring system. Now, there's a couple of schools that already have it, and you don't have to look at it day to day, but when something's not quite right, it means that you can go and see the exact same data that we are about your system, where things are going wrong, what kind of patterns are going on. So we keep 30 days of data in there. Your servers report certain kinds of data every 20 seconds or 20 or 30 seconds to us. So we've got some real granularity to work out where performance issues are going and what kinds of things we can plan for to help you get through. Now, the key to this is it's going to take my support team a little bit of time to help connect everyone up to their system, because I do have to link it to one email account. But if you do want access to that, if you send a support ticket in, over the next couple of weeks, we'll finish giving everyone access to their dashboards, and they can start to see the fun data that we're using to help design and make changes to Schoolbox, as well as trying to inform server performance decisions and capacity planning. Now, that's the last bit I've got, so I'll leave a pretty picture of a cat up, and hopefully you haven't all quite fallen asleep yet, because as much as I love talking about this, not everyone else does. Does anyone have some questions about handle? Yep, lots of questions. Choose your choice.
So what about, we always having issues when we're trying to upload these files into Schoolbox, and we haven't really managed to solve that. I think it's been solved in the past, but now it came back, and I'm getting a lot of these kind of requests of, the music teachers turned off the music or videos, and it keeps hanging, and someone needs to go in, kill it, and then she tries to upload the file again.
Do you mean so is that from the actual upload process of videos, or do you mean the transcoding process after it's uploaded?
I mean the upload process.
Okay. There are a few limitations in the stack that we have. There is a hard upload limit size of 2 gig, but I'm guessing that's probably less than this that you're talking about. I haven't seen that fleet-wide, so I'd probably like to have a look at how things are travelling to and from the Schoolbox server to see what paths they're taking. There has been some unusual network settings that we've had to apply in certain cases that haven't been stock, but I'd like to have a look at that because it's not something I've seen across the fleet. Do you ever?
Yeah. So with the monitoring login, does that have to be a Schoolbox user or can it be a generic sort of shared account?
Shared account would be fine. I just need one email address to link it up to. And the person who requests that be the email needs to be someone who's registered for support for Schoolbox. Just so that we can, not accidentally give access to the wrong people. But if you want a shared account, that's not a problem. Yeah.
You mentioned you were dropping the browser support. Are you popping up a little cookie notice to say that the browser's not fully supported? So I'm just thinking parents at home might go and resolve that.
Yeah. We haven't for IE9 10. IE8 did. We had a particular page just for that. IE10 we probably won't do because it probably does work. It's just that we're not choosing to actively design for it. IE9 will probably still mostly work with the exception of the notification panel. That probably won't at all because some issues around WebSockets in IE9. If it's something that was really wanted for IE9 in particular, it's something, consider it. Yeah, certainly right. Yeah, because IE8 definitely already has it. We already tripped them out. Although that said, because of the changes that we've done to HTTPS, most IE8 browsers can't even connect to Schoolbox full stop now. They just can't load the page. Whereas IE9 would be a bit different. So it's certainly Amory.
Sorry, Sam, we were bringing up at this point that even Microsoft has ceased support for any IE version before 11.
Yes. So Microsoft has dropped support for these before we did. Unfortunately, parents don't listen to Microsoft. Yeah. So here's the weird thing. If you've still got a parent on Windows XP, if they install Firefox, they can still connect to Schoolbox. Somehow that still works. That is one of those fun things.
Just with another thing that popped up, and because you're redoing the whole monitoring stack, is there an easy way we can get, and it's only because we had a security issue, access to the Apache web log so we can actually do actual monitoring precisely what someone's done from where? Is there a way you can expose that where we can download them or have access to them? Or?
You've already got access to them. Yeah, so the admin account that you have for SSH access has full sudo root access privileges. So if you want to set up something that wants to read those logs, they're there. Just give us a buzz and we'll explain the layout that we've set up just so you know what you're looking at in the formats. That's not a problem. I'd like to be able to collect some of that specific data back so that I can do some analysis on that as well. And I think James has got some things from a browser point of view that we're looking at. But there's too much data, unfortunately, across 210 servers we're monitoring for me to handle that appropriately. So at the moment, we're just doing it from the metric point of view, time series data at the moment. But we do use those logs when we go through. We have had instances where I remember one school, a student's password got posted on Reddit. That did not go down well. And we had to do a lot of cleaning up, pulling notifications out of the system that were already published, undoing a whole heap of changes that had occurred and that sort of stuff. We do have a decent level of logging, both between our Apache logs for web server and what's within Schoolbox. But there is more that we'd like to add over time to help give us a bit more visibility to what's going on and in what cases. Any other questions?
Talking about disk space and it getting less and less all the time, is there any plans for archiving previous years' data and everything like that to at least achieve it storage?
This is a great question. So, what you may be aware that Schoolbox already deduplicates all the files that are uploaded. Which we found when we originally deployed that saved between 10 and 25% of your disk space. And now it just does it ongoing, so it's not a process. The problem with it doing that gave us an issue where it was then harder to clean up files because we had to ensure that any file that we want to delete, hard delete, is definitely in no use at all anywhere in the system. And we allow you to put files and images everywhere, particularly within text boxes and all this kind of stuff. So part of this, I suppose part of this answer in terms of archiving is that, say you wanted to, if you just deleted a whole set of your folder structure that was 3 years old and you didn't want that anymore. The problem is that we did have what we called a garbage collector that could go along and read the system. The problem is when we deploy and then find all those files that aren't in use anymore. So had you deleted those and then it went through, it should have cleaned up after you. The 3 issues we had were, the first 2 was the first time we deployed it, it then didn't read one thing and actually deleted some files it wasn't supposed to. And I had a lovely job of calling a range of people. The second time we deployed it, it did it again, but in a completely new place. And so I haven't deployed it again since. In the short, in theory, that's all fixed, but yeah, so it's off to the side. So the other problem I had is that even when it was turned on, although for the first few days it saved a little bit of space, maybe at most 5 to 8% on some of the servers we did test it on. Once it was continuing to run, all it really did was reduce the rate of increase, and not as much as I would have hoped, which is a problem. So we all had the problem of the increasing data set. I'm still trying to find different ideas. Having cheaper storage, a larger amount of cheaper storage through using something like S3 is something that we're looking at using internally anyway for the cloud system. And there have been discussions with certain schools about the idea of maybe trying to back Schoolbox onto Amazon S3 or something like that, and then caching the layer back to the Schoolbox server as well. That's something that I think almost nightly about. It's very interesting to me from a technical point of view, because those kind of ideas may allow you to store a lot more data and still have the backups and resiliency without the cost.
Especially seeing them doing a lot of movies and
That's right. Now I know,
things like that, if you just farm it up to cheap storage.
yeah, particularly with the videos. Some schools have started to prioritize using external systems for video and having them embed, whether it's the click views or using locked YouTube accounts if it's for students, that sort of stuff, and you use GAIF and that sort of thing. There are some strategies around that, and they can help, but everyone likes uploading things. It's prolific. The other problem we're going to have is there's going to be a point later this year where we're going to need a certain amount of free space on your servers to upgrade to 17.5, because we need to download a whole heap of archive stuff from a third party that we're changing services for, which James is going to go into more detail, but the inline grader that we have is the service that we use to power the inline grader is closing off at the end of the year. And we've partnered with a new company which has better support, better touchscreen support, active development, and is based in New Zealand as a benefit too, which is great, but we have to download all the old documents out of that third party, so we're going to need a certain amount of space to do that. So there will be discussions with anyone who's on the red list to say, hey, I'm going to need about this much to pull down these archives when you go to 17.5. We need to plan for that. So we'll be talking to you about that actively. But yeah, the biggest schools that we have are nearly 750, 800 gig of data in their systems. They may have been working with us for 4 or 5 years, but it does build up over time, even when we could clean up stuff using that garbage collector. So we're going to have to find some more ways to address it through policy as well as practice. Well, I'm all done. Thanks very much.